Before we begin, I thought it would be fun if everyone lets me know in the comments where they're watching this video from. And while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe. Now, let's start today's episode. Abigail Williams and Liberty German. On February 13, 2017, best friends Abigail Williams, 13, and Liberty German, 14, planned a hike at the scenic Monon High Bridge Trail, located east of their small town of Delphi, Indiana. The day before, Abigail had stayed at Liberty's home for a sleepover. Liberty lived primarily with her grandparents, Mike and Becky Patty. Since school had been canceled that Monday, the two friends asked Liberty's grandmother if they could go hiking, and permission was granted as long as they arranged for transportation to and from the trail. Liberty's older sister, Kelsey German, dropped the girls off at 1:30 p.m. on her way to work, and they planned for Liberty's father, Derek German, to pick them up after completing a few errands, which would take about 2 hours. At 2:07 p.m., Liberty decided to record their hike. The girls took some pictures and posted one to Snapchat, showing Abigail smiling as she crossed the abandoned Monon High Bridge. At 3:11 p.m., Derek texted Liberty, asking them to start heading back to the meeting point for pickup. However, when Derek arrived at 3:14 p.m., he was shocked to find that the girls were nowhere to be seen. Derek continued to text and call Liberty multiple times but received no response. Growing increasingly worried, he decided to walk along the trail in search of the girls. After about 15 minutes with no success, he called Liberty's grandmother, Becky, to inform her that the girls were missing. The family spent about an hour searching the trail but found no signs of the girls. As darkness began to set in, they officially reported them missing to the police around 5 p.m. By 6 p.m., a large-scale search effort began. Authorities, along with over 100 local residents, scoured the trail that evening. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. The next day, February 14th, around noon, a volunteer searcher discovered the bodies of Abigail and Liberty near Deer Creek, roughly half a mile from the bridge where they were last seen in pictures. Authorities have not disclosed the cause of death or whether the girls were sexually assaulted. However, they released two compelling images of a prime suspect, believed to be the person responsible for their deaths. One of the images was captured by Liberty herself, while she was recording Abigail during their hike. The suspect appeared to be a middle-aged Caucasian male wearing a windbreaker or some type of coat, denim blue jeans, a brown hat, brown shoes or boots, and a brown undergarment which may be clothing or a fanny pack. 3 days later, on February 22, 2017, another clue was made public when police unveiled a 3-second audio clip of a male saying, quote, "down the hill." This was recorded from Liberty's phone. "Get down the hill. Get down the hill." Authorities stated that the audio recording started off as, quote, normal girl stuff talking and laughing, but when they saw the man on the bridge, the audio captured the girls becoming nervous and worried. It is believed that the girls initially saw the man while entering the trail and forgot about him by the time that they walked the bridge. When the man appeared again on the bridge, the girls may have sensed an impending danger. At one point, Liberty may have decided to click the picture of the suspect and conceal her phone while doing so at her side in her successful attempt to capture the suspect on tape. It is believed that the suspect was unaware of the phone as it was recovered at the crime scene. A hill is located next to the bridge, which is likely what the suspect is referring to in the audio tapes when he says, quote, "down the hill." The bodies of the young teens were found across the very shallow creek which flows at the bottom of the hill. It is unclear but theorized that given the shallowness of the water, the girls crossed over the creek and were murdered on the other side. Other theories postulate that the girls had already been murdered and were dragged or carried across the shallow water. In July of 2017, a witness came forward and reported that they had seen the suspect in the area around the same time the girls had been murdered. A composite sketch was created and released, and police stated that the suspect had reddish-brown hair, stood between 5'6" and 5'10" and weighed between 8 pounds 180 to 220. The eyewitness was uncertain of the suspect's exact eye color but is confident that they were not blue. In September of 2017, a possible suspect was identified and Daniel J. Nations was arrested at a traffic stop in Colorado. Nations, a registered sex offender in Indiana, was driving a car with expired Indiana license plates at the time of his arrest. Nations was arrested in Woodland Park for threatening people with a hatchet on Monument Hiking Trail. A bicyclist was also fatally shot on that trail around the same time Nations was allegedly threatening people. In his car, a red Chevy Prism, there was a hatchet and a .22 caliber rifle. Nations had a lengthy criminal record including domestic violence, possession of marijuana, driving with a suspended license, failure to appear in court, and pleasuring himself in a woman's restroom at a gas station. Although he was a person of interest in the case, police eventually ruled him out as the killer. Since February 14, 2017, the day after the girls were murdered, Nations, a registered homeless sex offender, was present for his weekly checkup with authorities and had been consistently attending in the time prior. Nations was sentenced to 3 years probation on January 5, 2018 for the charge of threatening hikers in Colorado. In more recent years, police have funneled $1 million into pursuing various leads, sometimes local and sometimes far-flung, and it could be these excess funds spent which make those close to the case angry that the true killer was under their noses the entire time, working in the very area the girls went missing at a local CVS, unbeknownst to the public. A spent but unused bullet casing was found in between the bodies of Abby and Libby. This can happen when the gun is cocked, and then uncocked, and then cocked again. The spent shell casing is dispensed from the gun, although the bullet is still encased. When the shell casing is ejected from the gun, it leaves specific trace scratches and indentations which can be traced back to the gun from which it was ejected. It is theorized that the killer cocked the gun and used it as a threat, possibly by putting it towards the head of one of the victims or another instantly fatal zone, and in doing so this may have motivated the victims through fear of their lives to do what the killer was asking. At some point in the attack, the killer must have disengaged the gun but later would go on to rack it again, most likely to continue those same scare tactics. It is in this subsequent engagement of the gun that the unshot bullet would have been released. The bullet was later traced to a gun registered to Richard Matthew Allen, a resident of Delphi and a husband and father. Also known as Ricky or Rick Allen, the 50-year-old lived only 5 minutes from the murder scene. Allen admitted that the gun was his, that he had purchased it in 2001, and that it had been in his possession the entire time. Allen admitted this information freely, possibly without realizing that there was evidence left at the crime scene. After he admitted that the gun had not left his possession nor had it been borrowed by a friend, he was arrested. Later it was revealed that he had admitted to a park ranger in the initial investigation that he had been in that area. The probable cause affidavit released a few days after Allen's arrest stated that there was further footage that police have not released that ties Allen to the crime. Those working the case first spoke with Allen in 2017, claims the affidavit, but Allen may not have been seen as a suspect until more recently due to a clerical error in the tips, but in a later interview, the FBI denies that such a clerical error has occurred and states that all proper protocols were followed in categorizations and filing about the tip about Richard Allen, which was originally received early on in the investigation, was properly handled. Libby's grandmother recalls that Richard Allen, who sometimes worked the photo booth at CBS, printed photos of the girls to be used at their funeral free of charge. Initially, the girls' families looked upon Richard's small act of generosity as evidence of the communal support shown for their daughters. It was only after his arrest that the true sinister meaning was uncovered. Not only does the shell casing tie Richard to the crime scene, but also Richard reported that he wore the same clothes as in the Snapchat video segments, which the public studied for years to no avail. Richard admits to being on that trail that day, saying that he arrived sometime around 1:30. Around that same time at 1:26 p.m. that day, witnesses referred to simply as juveniles were in the same area taking pictures, and they saw the same man later shown in the snapshot footage. It is assumed based on the geography of the area that it would take Allen around 10 minutes to walk from the entrance of the park to the bridge. At 1:49 p.m., Abby and Libby were dropped off at that entrance across from Mears Farm. Shortly before that time, an adult witness, labeled Adult Witness Number 1, traveled to the bridge and saw the man, later identified as Richard Allen, standing on the first platform. Roughly 5 minutes after seeing the man, the same adult witness would turn around and, while walking halfway between the bridge and the parking lot area, see Libby and Abby approaching the bridge. At 2:05 p.m. Libby would upload a picture to Snapchat. At 2:07 p.m. Libby would upload a picture of Abby walking on the bridge. The girls first encountered the man who is now supposed to be Richard Allen at 2:13 p.m. Libby's video provides crucial evidence, showing Abby walking across the southeast side of the bridge, with a man, who is believed to be Richard, following behind her. As the man nears, one of the girls whispers, "Gun," under her breath, as captured in the Snapchat video. Shortly afterward, the man orders the teenagers to go down the hill, as shown in the video that was later released to the public. Under duress, the girls comply and walk down the hill, and the video abruptly ends. The suspect, who later admitted to being at the scene, claimed he left the park around 3:30 p.m., according to the probable cause affidavit. At 3:57 p.m., a separate witness observed a male subject, covered in mud and blood, walking along the north side of 300 Northway, near the Monon Highway Bridge. Law enforcement has recovered DNA from the crime scene, though it remains unclear whether the DNA definitively matches the offender. A preliminary hearing took place on November 22, 2022, and a jury trial is set to begin on March 20, 2023. Moving on to the next case. Brian McDermott. The 1970s were marked by the rise of bell-bottoms, disco music, and the growing popularity of cassette tapes. However, it was also a time shadowed by fear, especially in America, where the chilling crimes of figures like Charles Manson, Ted Bundy, and John Wayne Gacy sent ripples of terror through society. Amid this unsettling era, many cases of missing children and murders went unnoticed, some still unsolved to this day. One such case was that of Brian Douglas McDermott, a 10-year-old boy from Belfast who disappeared in 1973. Described as a quiet child, Brian was the youngest of 5 children born to Edward and Joan McDermott. On the afternoon of September 2, 1973, he left his home on Wells Street in the Lower Woodstock Road area to play with friends at the park. He was expected back for Sunday lunch at 2:30 p.m., but he never returned. His parents, immediately concerned, contacted the authorities, who quickly organized a search. The search party scoured the surrounding areas, including derelict buildings and the Tullymore Forest Park, but no sign of Brian could be found. A week later, on September 8th, authorities turned their attention to the River Lagan. The water was lowered to allow a more thorough investigation, and what they discovered was every parent's worst nightmare. A sack containing parts of Brian McDermott's dismembered body was found. Although one arm and 2 legs were missing, investigators were unable to recover them despite their best efforts. The missing limbs remain a mystery to this day. The body was also burned, leading authorities to suspect that after the slaying, the perpetrator had attempted to disguise Brian's true identity by burning his flesh. Local parents feared for the safety of their children, terrified that a killer walked among them, while the McDermott family fell to pieces and began to grieve for their lost child and brother. Brian was laid to rest on September 13, 1973. While thousands of interviews were carried out, tips were thoroughly investigated, and a huge manhunt for the culprit was carried out. The police felt like they were running out of leads. They reportedly looked for sectarian links, pedophile rings, and witchcraft theories, but none of them turned up any promising leads. They also briefly considered links to the Kincora boys' home in Belfast. This was due to the idea in 1982 that Brian's case concerns, quote, possible homosexual aspects. The home was the scene of numerous serious sexual abuse allegations which led to a massive scandal and attempted cover-up in 1980. There were even rumors about state collusion and whisperings that a pedophile ring was operating from inside the home which had links to intelligence services. However, there has never been any established connection between Brian's case and the boys' home. The authorities also looked into 16-year-old William McDermott, Brian's older brother. They had suspected that perhaps he had taken childish revenge on his younger sibling after Brian had hit him in the back with a stick. The police had had their eye on him for a while, but it wasn't until 1976 that they were able to pull him in for questioning when his mother reported him for beating her. William did confess during questioning, but quickly recanted this admission of guilt, and ever since, he has maintained his innocence and claimed that the confession was coerced. Then in February 8th, his ex-wife told a court in Worcester that he had admitted to ending Brian's life. This was heard during a hearing over William sending his ex-wife threatening and abusive texts. William has other convictions for violent offenses but continues to maintain his innocence. Brian's older brother, Eddie, who was 19 at the time of his disappearance, has acted as the family's spokesman over the years. He has publicly stated that the family are estranged from William, having cut ties with him long ago. Eddie in particular believes that William is guilty of what happened to Brian, in claiming that he grew suspicious when William said that he didn't want a book published about Brian's case when a writer approached the family in February 3rd. He even went so far as to contact his local MP asking for him to put a stop to it. According to Eddie, William began to deteriorate after this, growing more aggressive and dangerous. In 1993, the Irish newspaper, The Sunday Life, received an anonymous letter and drawing of a suspect in connection with the case. A letter received by authorities in the aftermath of Brian McDermott's death suggested that the man depicted in a drawing might have lived near where Brian was last seen, even providing an address. However, this lead seemed to have gone nowhere, and the case remained largely overshadowed by the ongoing troubles in Ireland at the time. As a result, details about the investigation into Brian's murder remained scarce. In 2003, it was reported that the police had not ruled out possible connections to witchcraft or pedophilia, but no conclusive evidence emerged. The tragic loss of their son led to a downward spiral for Brian's parents. Joan and Edward McDermott struggled with grief and turned to alcohol, as the family lived on the brink of emotional collapse. Joan McDermott, in particular, held on to the belief that her son William was involved in some way, a conviction she maintained until her death in 2004. The case of Brian McDermott remains unsolved to this day. Anyone with information is urged to contact Crime Stoppers at 0800 555 111. Moving on to the next case. Cora Watts. On Sunday, May 23, 1982, roommates Lori Lister, 21, and Melinda Aguilar, 18, experienced a terrifying attack in their Houston, Texas apartment. A man appeared to specifically target them, seemingly with the intention of killing them. He tied the two women up and attempted to drown Lori in the bathtub. However, Melinda managed to escape by pretending to faint and then leaping headfirst from the balcony. She sought help, and with the assistance of a neighbor, both she and Lori were rescued. The attacker was 28-year-old Cora Watts, who was arrested as he attempted to flee. What no one could have predicted, though, was that Watts was not only involved in these two attempted murders, but was also suspected of having killed nearly 100 other women. He confessed to killing 13 women and was sentenced to 60 years in 1982. However, a shocking twist came in the early 2000s. Despite his gruesome crimes, Watts was nearly set free. This was due to a controversial legal ruling that reclassified him as a nonviolent felon. Under Texas law, well-behaved nonviolent felons could earn time off their sentence, 3 days for every day served. As a model prisoner, Watts had accumulated enough time off his sentence that, by May 9, 2006, he could have been released. The news left police, victims' families, and the public in shock and fear. Lingering questions haunted everyone involved. How could this be happening? Would he truly be released back into society? Why would this killer be set free? How could a serial murderer, responsible for so many deaths, be released from custody? Carl Eugene Watts, who went by the name Coral, was born on November 7, 1953, in Killeen, Texas, to Richard Eugene Watts and Dorothy Mae Young. His father served as a private first class in the Army, while his mother worked as a kindergarten art teacher. Before Watts turned 2, his parents separated, and he was raised by his mother. The family moved to Inkster, Michigan, where Dorothy later remarried a mechanic named Norman Caesar. Together, they had 2 daughters. When Watts was 8, he and his sister contracted meningitis, a life-threatening illness that caused him to be held back a year in school, preventing him from completing the 3rd grade. Hermann Kiefer Hospital became Watts' temporary home, where he underwent spinal taps and had to be isolated from other patients. Reports from journalists suggested that Watts' body temperature reached alarming levels, raising concerns about potential brain damage. Following his illness, his family noticed a transformation in his personality. He became bashful, quiet, and introverted, with a compromised attention span and a deteriorating memory. Struggling to keep up academically due to being held back a grade and suffering from chronic sleeplessness, Watts began having violent dreams about combating and killing malevolent spirits of women, and these disrupted his sleep cycle. When questioned later about his motives for killing, Watts claimed he wanted to release the spirits of his victims, believing they had evil eyes. At the age of 12, he began fantasizing about torturing and killing girls and young women while sleeping. It was during his teenage years that he started stalking girls, and it's believed he may have killed his first victim before turning 15. At 15, Watts was identified by the police as the attacker of 26-year-old Joan Gave on July 29, 1969. During his newspaper delivery route, Watts knocked on Joan's apartment door and, upon her opening it, violently assaulted her. Without any apparent remorse, he resumed his delivery route as though nothing had happened. Joan immediately contacted the authorities and reported the assault, which led to Coral's arrest at his home. As a result, he was sent to the Lafayette Clinic in Detroit for psychiatric treatment. A psychiatric evaluation revealed that he had a mild intellectual disability, with an IQ of 75 and a delusional thought process. Despite his poor academic performance, a police officer later described him as exceptionally intelligent with an excellent memory. Watts was released from the Lafayette Clinic on November 7, 1969. Despite academic struggles, Watts graduated from high school in 1973 and earned a football scholarship to Lane College in Jackson, Tennessee. However, he was expelled after 3 months due to allegations of stalking and assaulting women. Additionally, suspicion surrounded Watts in the cruel murder of a female student, contributing to his expulsion, although insufficient evidence prevented a conviction. Following his expulsion, he relocated to Houston, Texas. In 1979, Coral Watts and his girlfriend, Dolores Howard, welcomed their daughter, Nikisha Watts. However, shortly after her birth, Coral and Dolores ended their relationship and went separate ways. Coral then married Valeria Goodwill. Soon after their marriage, Valeria began to notice strange behaviors in Coral. He would constantly rearrange the furniture, use knives to mutilate houseplants, break candles and melt them onto the table, and scatter trash around the house without cleaning it up. Additionally, after moments of intimacy, he would abruptly leave, disappearing for hours. Unfortunately, their marriage only lasted 6 months. Watts' murder spree officially began when he was 20 years old in 1974, though there are suspicions he may have had other victims before this time. He would kidnap his victims from their homes, subject them to torture, and then murder them. Operating in various states, his victims were mainly thin, attractive white women, aged between 14 and 44. Watts used different methods to murder his victims, including strangulation, stabbing, bludgeoning, and drowning. At 10:45 a.m. on October 25, 1974, Coral knocked on 23-year-old Leonore Nasaki's apartment door, claiming to be looking for Charles, the name of one of his siblings. He engaged Leonore in conversation. When she opened the door with the chain still secured, Coral asked if he could leave a note. As she went to fetch paper, he suddenly attacked Nasaki and choked her into unconsciousness. Although Leonore later alerted police, they were unable to locate her assailant. 5 days later, on October 30, 1974, Watts tortured and ruthlessly killed 20-year-old Gloria Steele, believed to be his second victim. A student at Western Michigan University, Gloria was also a mother. She was found with a crushed windpipe and 33 stab wounds to her chest, inflicted by a wooden carving instrument. He didn't face a direct murder charge due to a lack of solid evidence. The only witness, Diane K. Williams, an apartment resident manager, observed a black man searching for Charles around the apartment complex. Upon seeing Williams, Corral seized her, forced her door open, and dragged her inside. During their struggle, Williams' phone rang, prompting her to knock it off the hook and scream for help. As her attacker fled, Williams saw him getting into a tan Pontiac Grand Prix. In a police lineup, both Williams and Nozaki identified Coral, who had been apprehended for stealing plywood from the Western Michigan University campus. For the Nozaki and Williams cases, he was taken into custody and charged with assault and battery on November 16, 1974. After being diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and attempting to take his own life with a length of cord at the Kalamazoo Mental Hospital, Watts was relocated to the Center for Forensic Psychiatry in Michigan. When questioned about the death of Gloria Steele in 1975, he admitted being nearby the day before Gloria died. However, he denied being responsible for her death, despite confessing to attacking approximately 15 other young women. A search at Watts' residence by Detroit police, conducted under a search warrant, revealed a wooden carving tool, but no evidence linking him to Gloria's death. During his trial for the assault and battery of Nozaki and Williams, Watts entered a no-contest plea and was subsequently sentenced to a year in the county jail. Psychologists evaluating him characterized Watts as extremely hazardous, lacking remorse for his crimes, reckless, careless, and emotionally distant, with a high likelihood of relapsing. After that, a series of attacks occurred in the Detroit region over the span of a year, where he claimed the lives of 5 women. One peculiar discovery was that the majority of his crimes happened on Sunday mornings. This odd pattern earned the perpetrator the ominous nickname Sunday Morning Slasher from Ann Arbor newspaper, heightening the mystery surrounding the timing of these horrifying attacks, all occurring at around 4 a.m. In 1980, Shirley Small, a 17-year-old from Ann Arbor, Michigan, was fatally stabbed twice outside her home on April 20th. A similar attack targeted Glenda Richmond, 26, on July 13, 1980. Both cases lacked sufficient evidence for conviction, but exhibited Watts' characteristics. The first homicide directly attributed to Corell occurred on September 14, 1980, when 20-year-old graduate student Rebecca Hoff was found dead, having endured around 50 stab wounds. A 20-year-old named Delphi survived an attack on October 6, 1980, but suffered severe consequences, including partial paralysis and muscle weakness. On November 1, 1980, a 30-year-old woman, Agnes, narrowly escaped an attack by a hooded man resembling Watts after raising the alarm while returning from a Halloween party. Although she identified Watts from photos, the dimly lit surroundings left uncertainty. In July 1980, local homicide investigators turned their attention to Watts, prompting the formation of a task force to delve into the Sunday's slashings. Watts came under sporadic surveillance, and in November, a court order allowed officers to install a tracking device on his car. On November 15, 1980, around 5 in the morning, 2 patrol officers near Main Street, Ann Arbor observed a suspicious man in a car following a woman walking home. Realizing she was being tailed, the woman sought refuge in a doorway in an attempt to elude or pursue her. Coral, frustrated by losing track of the woman, was apprehended by the police when they pulled over his car for outdated license plates and driving with a suspended license. During the inspection of his vehicle, authorities found a package containing wood-filling equipment and a few screwdrivers. Their most significant discovery was a dictionary belonging to Rebecca Hoff, bearing the carved phrase, "Rebecca is a lover." However, it proved insufficient evidence to link him directly to her murder. In the spring of 1981, Corral relocated to Columbus, Texas, and secured employment with an oil firm. During the weekends, he would travel over 70 miles to his next hunting ground in the Houston region. Between 1974 and 1982, Watts committed murders of numerous women, totaling dozens. Despite the extensive list of victims, Watts managed to evade detection as a serial killer for nearly 8 years. Several factors contributed to this elusiveness. Watts operated across various jurisdictions and even different states, complicating the task of connecting the crimes. Additionally, his modus operandi diverged from typical patterns as he never engaged in physical intimacy with his victims, unlike many other serial killers targeting women and girls. Consequently, even with the emergence of DNA testing, linking the crimes proved challenging. Furthermore, Watts was not considered a suspect by those who knew him, and law enforcement did not identify him as a potential perpetrator until his arrest in 1982. On May 23, 1982, Melinda Aguilar, 18, and Lori Lister, 21, experienced a break-in at their Houston apartment by Watts. When Lori came back from work, Watts choked her down the steps outside the apartment. Subsequently, he entered the apartment and began strangling Melinda. Pretending to be unconscious, Melinda managed to escape being strangled completely. Watts wire-tied her hands behind her back with the intent to drown Lori. He carried Lori's body upstairs to the bathroom, filling the bathtub with water. However, Melinda seized the opportunity and leaped out of the window to seek help. Lori was saved and Watts was apprehended after he initially tried evading capture. While he was in custody, investigators started linking him to recent killings of women. Despite the connections, Texas prosecutors believed there was insufficient evidence to secure a murder conviction against Watts. In May 1982, following the attacks on Melinda Aguilar and Lori Lister, Harris County Assistant District Attorney Ira Jones negotiated a plea bargain. Watts would admit fully to his crimes, receiving immunity from murder prosecution in exchange for a charge of burglary with intent to murder. He agreed to a 60-year sentence for this offense. Watts accepted the deal, leading detectives to the graves of 3 victims. Finally, Watts confessed to attacking 19 women, resulting in the murder of 13. He admitted to killing some victims, but also refrained from confessing to the deaths for a few. However, Michigan authorities declined to participate in the deal, leaving his cases in that state open. However, the hope for justice took a devastating turn when, shortly into his prison term, the Texas Court of Appeals ruled that Watts had not been informed that the bathtub and water he used in the attempt to drown Lori Lister were considered deadly weapons. This decision reclassified him as a nonviolent felon and eventually opened the door to early release. This was because Texas law at the time granted nonviolent felons 3 days deducted from their sentences for every 1 day served with good behavior. Watts, a model prisoner, accumulated time deductions that could have seen him released as early as May 9, 2006. The subsequent abolishment of the early release law prompted by public outcry brought little solace as it couldn't be retroactively applied as dictated by the Texas Constitution. In 2004, a plea for justice echoed across the nation as Michigan Attorney General Mike Cox sought information to convict Watts of murder and prevent his potential release. Joseph Foy from Westland, Michigan bravely stepped forward, recounting the chilling sight of a man resembling Watts murdering 36-year-old Helen Dutcher on December 1, 1979. Helen had succumbed to 12 stab wounds. Foy identified Watts by his eyes, hauntingly describing them as evil and devoid of emotion. Despite Watts' immunity from prosecution for the 13 confessed killings in Texas, Michigan held no such agreement. As the 2004 trial neared, law enforcement officials urged the trial judge to allow the Texas confessions to be admitted as evidence, a request that was granted. Watts was convicted for the murders of Helen Dutcher and Gloria Steele, receiving 2 life sentences without parole in a Michigan prison on November 17, 2004. He was placed in a maximum security facility in Ionia, Michigan. However, a few years into his sentence, he succumbed to prostate cancer on September 21, 2007, in a hospital in Jackson, Michigan. Ultimately, Watts avoided serving his full sentence for the lives he had taken, leaving behind a tragic conclusion to his dark and violent story. Coral Eugene Watts, a vicious serial killer, spread fear across the country with his numerous murders. Despite his confessions, legal loopholes led to a reduced sentence and nearly allowed his release. His later conviction for the 1979 murder of Helen Dutcher revealed the true extent of his depravity. Watts remains a chilling reminder of concealed evil, with the Ann Arbor murders remaining unsolved, casting a long, eerie shadow over his legacy. Moving on to the next case. Ellie Gould. On May 3, 2019, 17-year-old Ellie Gould decided to spend the day studying alone, skipping her usual class. Unbeknownst to anyone, the quiet behind her closed door concealed a horrifying truth. When her father came home, he expected to hear his daughter's cheerful greeting but instead found an eerie silence. The kitchen had turned into a nightmare. There, Ellie lay motionless, not the lively girl she once was, but a still figure in a pool of crimson, with a knife beside her and stab wounds on her throat. Her once determined eyes stared blankly, leaving an air of confusion and dread. Why would Ellie, a young woman with so much promise, end her life? However, there was more to the story than it first appeared. A silver Ford Fiesta had been spotted near the family home, and rumors began circulating about an unseen figure who may have been present in the house before Ellie's tragic end. Was this person involved in her death? The key question remained, was this an act of self-harm, or was it something more sinister? Caen, Wiltshire, is a small, peaceful town in southwestern England, surrounded by picturesque hills. The air in Caen is filled with the fresh scent of cut grass, and the River Martin gently winds through its banks, flanked by graceful willow trees. Cobbled streets meander past stone cottages, each adorned with colorful window boxes brimming with blooms. The town square, shaded by ancient oak trees, hosts a lively market every week, where vibrant conversations fill the air. In this peaceful environment, Ellie thrived. Amid the soothing sounds of church bells and distant trains, Caen was more than just a picturesque location. It was a place that shaped Ellie's dreams and aspirations with its quiet charm. Ellie was born on February 6, 2002, to Carol and Matthew Gould, both in their late 40s. A Year 12 student at Hardenhuis School, Ellie approached her A-levels with ambition and determination. But her life wasn't just about exams and studying. She found peace in the open fields, where she loved riding her cherished horse. A natural equestrian, Ellie dreamed of joining the mounted police one day. To those who knew her, Ellie was a true friend, someone who would listen to your deepest thoughts and make you laugh until your sides ached. One of her closest companions was her 17-year-old cousin, Jess Vine. The two were inseparable. Ellie also harbored aspirations of studying psychology, eager to understand the minds of others. Ellie saw those A-levels as more than just exams. They were her path to understanding the complexities of the human mind, from its strengths to its darker sides and the intriguing gray areas in between. She wanted to help others, to explore what made people tick, and to contribute in some way to making the world a little brighter. But life took an unexpected and devastating turn for Ellie. No one could have imagined the horrific way she would be taken from them. On May 3, 2019, Ellie decided to stay home to study for her A-levels instead of going to school. However, this day would unfold in a way no one could have predicted. When her father, Matthew Gould, returned from work, everything changed. The usual noise and laughter in the house were replaced by an unsettling silence that would never leave. Panic set in as Matthew found Ellie. In shock, he immediately called for an ambulance and, overwhelmed with disbelief, contacted Carol, Ellie's mother, not knowing how to process the nightmare that had just unfolded before him. His once vibrant daughter now lay on the floor, eyes open and emotionless, her lovely face scarred, and her laugh gone. The Wiltshire police investigation revealed that Ellie had been lying lifeless in her kitchen for at least 4 hours. Shockingly, she had suffered 13 separate stab wounds to her neck and showed signs of strangulation. The manner of the stabbing was so aggressive and disturbing that even the best surgeons or any form of first aid wouldn't have been able to save her. It was a tragic and horrifying situation beyond help. The police quickly concluded that Ellie couldn't have done this to herself, and the chance of a stranger being responsible was very slim. Everything in the house remained undisturbed, leading them to believe it wasn't an outsider. The police were baffled as the evidence suggested that it wasn't an outsider. They started exploring closer circles, family, friends, or someone known to Ellie. The motive remained a mystery, making this case even more complicated. Her parents, still bewildered, initially considered the possibility that Ellie may have fallen accidentally from a chair or may have caused harm to herself unknowingly. However, Matthew, her father, paused and reconsidered the entire scene. Perhaps he sensed that something was amiss or realized that there might be more to the situation than initially thought. The breakthrough came when a neighbor provided a crucial lead. They had seen a slim, unidentified male visitor in Ellie's house earlier that day. Though the investigators never saw the person's face, the description of him became a pivotal lead in the case. The search for this mysterious young man marked a crucial shift in the investigation. Once they received this lead, investigator D.S. Jim Taylor and his team quickly set out to interview all of Ellie's friends. They began with Ellie Welling, a 17-year-old classmate and close friend of Ellie Gould. Ellie Welling had been scheduled to pick Ellie up on the day of her tragic death, May 3, 2019. After speaking with Ellie's friends, the police found themselves at a standstill. However, their attention was drawn to a suspicious vehicle seen near Ellie's home, an unfamiliar car that showed up on surveillance footage shortly after Ellie's death. To make progress in the investigation, the police turned to Ellie's parents, asking if there was anyone among her friends they suspected. Since they knew all of Ellie's friends well, they couldn't think of anyone immediately. The breakthrough came when the police asked if Ellie had been in a romantic relationship. That's when her parents recalled 18-year-old Thomas Griffiths. Thomas was an A-level student, a rugby player for the premier team, and a respected member of Harden Hoist School in Chappenham, Wiltshire. He came from a respectable family and appeared to have a promising future ahead of him. Ellie had known Thomas since 7th grade and had harbored a huge crush on him. So undoubtedly, she was very excited when they finally entered into a relationship. They officially started dating in January 2019, and their connection flowed smoothly, marking Thomas as Ellie's first boyfriend. Ellie's parents were well informed about every aspect of her life, so inevitably, she confided in her mom about Griffith. While her parents wished she'd prioritize her studies over boys, they also understood the fragility of teenage love, something they aimed to navigate carefully. Despite their preference for her focus on schooling, they agreed to let her date. However, they insisted on meeting Thomas and invited him over for dinner to become better acquainted with him. One evening, as they sat in the kitchen having dinner, Ellie's parents kept a close eye on Thomas as they tried to get an idea of his character. Although there weren't any obvious red flags, he was pretty quiet and seemed introverted. They thought it was probably due to his young age and the nerves of meeting Ellie's family. Understanding and supportive, Ellie's parents were keen on granting her space. Knowing she was a bright and independent child, however, they observed Thomas and quietly wondered as to why Ellie chose someone who didn't quite seem to match her. Despite their certainty that Ellie and Thomas were incompatible, they held back from expressing their thoughts, respecting Ellie's judgment. Hoping for Ellie's happiness, they decided to give Thomas a chance. Thomas had even joined the celebration of Ellie's 17th birthday right in their own kitchen on the 6th of February, 2019. It was a moment where her parents warmly welcomed him into their home and extended gestures of affection and acceptance toward him. The honeymoon phase of Ellie and Thomas's relationship didn't last long. 3 months in, cracks began to show. Ellie, who was initially swept off her feet, felt her independence suffocated under Thomas's constant need for her. He craved her presence 24/7, and the spark of excitement morphed into a smothering clinginess. Any attempt of hers to meet friends or prioritize her levels was met with grumpy disapproval. The future Thomas envisioned, sprinkled with talk of marriage, clashed wildly with Ellie's desire for space and growth. Their dreams for their relationship were running on parallel tracks destined to collide. Ellie, who yearned for freedom and a chance to be herself, felt trapped in a commitment she wasn't ready for. The once picture-perfect romance had become a struggle to balance expectations and maintain her own identity. She felt she wasn't ready for a serious relationship and wanted to focus on school, especially her upcoming exams, and informed her mom about her intention to end things with Thomas. Unsurprised by the news, her mom inquired if there was a specific reason or if Ellie needed to talk. Ellie reassured her mom that nothing had happened, and she simply wanted to stay single for a while. She urged her mom not to worry and that she had everything under control. Later, Ellie went to a room and broke up with Thomas through text. Thomas persistently denied the breakup and professed his love along with their compatibility, but Ellie stood strong on her decision. Sharing the news of their breakup with friends on May 2, 2019, she knew Thomas might feel upset, but hoped they could still remain friends. The following day, when police discovered Ellie in their kitchen, doubts arose about whether Thomas, an A-level student, could even possess the capability for such a thing. On the night of May 2, 2019, asked her parents if she could stay home the next morning because she didn't have classes until the afternoon. She planned to study for her exams before heading to school in the afternoon for her history class. The next morning, on May 3, 2019, she arranged for a friend, Ellie Welling, to pick her up at 12 p.m. to go to school together. On that day, Griffith's mother dropped him off at Hardenhoist School in Chippenham, where both he and Ellie were enrolled as sixth formers. Thomas entered the school cafeteria and inquired with Ellie's friends about her whereabouts. He had been searching for her since morning, eager to discuss the breakup they had the previous evening. When he got to know that Ellie wasn't in school, quickly decided to leave. Thomas clearly lied to inform a teacher that he wasn't feeling well and made his way to the nearby bus station as he headed back home. On reaching home, he swiftly changed his attire. He wore a black hoodie and different sneakers. However, as he prepared to leave, his mother unexpectedly returned home. He panicked and quickly hid in a cupboard until she left. When his mom left, and he was by himself, Thomas took the spare car keys and drove to Ellie's house, which was about a 10-minute drive. When he got there, he knocked on her front door wanting to talk to her. It's said that they argued in the kitchen when Thomas understood Ellie was serious about breaking up. In the middle of the argument, he started choking Ellie when she tried hard to protect herself. Even though she fought back, Thomas didn't stop, and Ellie passed out. He took a knife from the kitchen and stabbed Ellie in her neck not once, but 13 times, even though she couldn't fight back. When he saw she was no longer moving, he washed the knife to remove his fingerprints. Then he made it look like Ellie hurt herself, and arranged things in a way that seemed like she did it. After that, he cleaned up where it happened and then used Ellie's phone to text a friend while pretending to be her. He did this to make sure no one found Ellie's body until much later in the day. As Ellie fought to protect herself, she accidentally scratched Thomas on his face and neck. When Thomas saw these marks, he came up with a plan to cover up what he had done. He told his friends in a group chat that he was really upset because of the breakup and even said he was hurting himself on purpose, then sent messages to Ellie's phone as if he was unaware of anything unusual and suggested that they meet up to talk about their relationship. Police went to Thomas's house to inquire with him about Ellie. They immediately noticed his neck, which had fresh scratch marks that Ellie left on him when he had ruthlessly murdered her. Thomas denied having anything to do with Ellie's murder, but police knew there was more to the story. Examining the family's Wi-Fi router settings, investigators discovered Thomas's phone disconnected from the home network soon after he returned from school on the morning of May 3rd. It remained offline for several hours, reconnecting only after 12 p.m. Suspecting this time frame aligned with Ellie's murder, they scrutinized surveillance footage around Ellie's residence to gather more information. At 11:56, a passing bus's CCTV recorded a silver Ford Fiesta departing from Ellie's neighborhood. The vehicle's registration number was visible, leading the police to trace it back to the Griffiths family. As no other family member was at home at the time, it strongly implicated Thomas as the driver. Despite this evidence, Thomas persistently denied any role in Ellie's murder or being present at the crime scene. Upon further scrutiny of the family's Wi-Fi router, police discovered that Thomas's phone connected to the home network after 12 p.m., only to disconnect for an 18-minute window. The police turned their attention to the surroundings and identified a nearby wooded area. Walking out of Thomas's front door, they precisely timed a 9-minute walk towards the woods. Upon reaching the 9-minute mark, they halted and scrutinized the area. Swiftly, they uncovered a black bin liner that contained blood-stained napkins, clothes, and towels, later confirmed to hold Ellie's DNA. From the search in Thomas's room, investigators discovered a pair of black sneakers that contained Ellie's blood and that added on to the mounting evidence. Subsequently, Thomas was arrested and charged with the murder of Ellie Gould. In August 2019, confessed his intent to plead guilty to the crime. He recounted visiting Ellie's home on the morning of May 2nd, admitting to an argument and alleging a blackout, claiming inability to recollect subsequent events. In a heart-wrenching statement, Ellie's mother, Carol, expressed the family's trust in Griffith. Recalling how they welcomed him into their home, even celebrating Ellie's birthday together, she painfully described the unimaginable act of holding Ellie's cold hand after her murder, a pain no parent should endure. Initially, she couldn't believe Griffiths. The innocent boy who loved their daughter would harm Ellie. Matthew, Ellie's dad, described how the haunting image of her motionless body continuously disturbed his mind and affected his sleep and everyday routines. In court, it came to light that Griffiths, driven by Ellie's rejection, violently assaulted her. The autopsy indicated initial incapacitation from pressure on her neck followed by over a dozen knife wounds. Before fleeing, Griffiths staged the scene and placed Ellie's hand on the knife that he left near her neck to deceive investigators. He even tried to disguise the scratches on his face as self-inflicted, fabricating anxious messages to his friends. In November 2019, the Bristol Crown Court sentenced Thomas Griffiths to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 12 years. In court, a letter of apology from Griffiths was read aloud. Ellie's mother stared at Thomas and shook her head. Considering his age is a mitigating factor, as UK law doesn't permit life sentences for those 18, the court also noted that his use of a knife from the victim's household doesn't suggest premeditation. Thomas Griffiths will be eligible for parole in 2031, at the age of 29. The tragic story of Ellie Gould serves as a painful reminder of how fragile life is and how cruelly dreams can be taken away. Her aspirations, love, and future were all robbed from her. Furthermore, her case sheds light on the complexities hidden within relationships that might seem perfect on the surface. The sorrow of losing Ellie, combined with the relentless pursuit of justice, serves as a cautionary tale, urging us to be careful about who we allow into our lives. On a larger scale, Carol Gould's campaign for tougher sentences in cases like Ellie's sparked vital discussions about domestic violence and sentencing for young offenders. Carol's initiative, known as Ellie's Law, aimed to bring fairness to sentencing, especially concerning the discrepancy between those who bring weapons into situations and those who commit acts with weapons they find. After 2 years of persistent campaigning, Carol and her family achieved a significant victory. This new legislation meant that teenage murderers could now face sentences of up to 27 years, providing a sense of relief to those who fought tirelessly for justice. Moving on to the next case. Ronda Johnson and Sharon Shaw. On August 4, 1971, 14-year-old Ronda Renee Johnson, who preferred her middle name, and 13-year-old Sharon Lynn Shaw spent the afternoon at Galveston Bay Beach in Texas. They had originally planned to visit the Wicks Water Ski School, but the rough waters made water skiing impossible. Their friend Glenda Willis recalled in a 2015 interview with the Houston Chronicle that she offered the girls a ride home when she was ready to leave, but they declined. The last known sighting of the girls was as they walked along Sewell Boulevard in Galveston, but they never made it home. On January 3, 1972, 2 boys fishing in Clear Lake stumbled upon a human skull floating in the water. Initially mistaking it for a sports ball, they soon realized it was something much more sinister. Over the following weeks, searchers recovered the rest of the remains in the marshes near the water. In February 1972, the skull's teeth were compared to the dental records of Sharon Shaw, who had been missing for 6 months. Sharon's crucifix necklace was found wrapped around the skull, confirming her identity. The second set of remains was later identified as those of Renee Johnson, though both girls' bodies were too decomposed to determine a cause of death. In May 1972, authorities received a tip from Glenn Price, a local city councilman, who suggested they investigate a sex offender named Michael Lloyd Self. Self, who worked at a gas station, had previously been involved in multiple peeping Tom incidents. Following this lead, police visited Michael at his workplace. They asked him to come down to the station for questioning, and the next day, Michael arrived voluntarily ready to answer the inquiries that the law enforcement may have for him. When asked if he knew the girls, Michael admitted that he did recognize them, but said he didn't know them. After this, however, things changed. According to Michael's story, Chief Michael Morris held him in confinement for hours, telling him he couldn't leave unless he confessed. He claimed that he was held up against a wall, hit with a nightstick, and taunted by Chief Morris with his pistol. Morris threatened to kill Michael if he didn't confess to the murders. Worn down and terrified, Michael agreed to confess. He was reportedly forced to handwrite his confession and then made to rewrite it several times. Later on, an investigator named Dave Coburn would corroborate Michael's story that he was coerced into writing the confession. Coburn even wanted to be a witness at Michael's trial, but he was never called. Coburn had seen Police Chief Morris treat another suspect in this exact same manner a year prior to the tragic case of Renee Johnson and Sharon Shaw. The final signed confession produced by Michael contains several discrepancies. He claimed that he dumped the bodies of the girls in El Lago over 20 miles from the marshlands where the remains were found. He also said that he had strangled both, but neither showed signs of strangulation during the coroner's inquest. 3 days later, he provided still more conflicting stories, telling 2 deputy sheriffs that he'd picked the girls up from a Sizzler steakhouse, driven around an El Largo neighborhood with them, and then gotten food with them at a local Jack in the Box restaurants. After this, he claimed he struck both girls over the head with a glass Coca-Cola bottle before stripping them off their clothing and throwing it onto the highway, despite the fact that both girls were found with their clothing. There were also witnesses who claimed to have seen the girls in Galveston around 9 p.m. on the night they disappeared, while Michael claimed that at that time, the girls were in his car with him. 2 weeks later, Michael Self was checked out of jail by sheriff's deputies and driven to the locations he mentioned in his written confession. The deputies took photos of him in each location, and these photos were later presented in court during his trial as a third confession, while Michael's lawyer rebutted this, claiming that what they'd done was illegal. Michael's trial began on May 15, 1973 and finished on September 18, 1974. He was convicted for the first-degree murder of Sharon Shaw, but was not convicted for the slaying of Renee Johnson. He was sentenced to life in prison. Over the years, Michael continuously tried to appeal the court's decision until he had no appeals left. He was refused each and every time, even after it came to light that Chief Morris and Deputy Tommy Deal had been involved in a string of robberies that had begun in 1972. The pair were arrested, with Morris being sentenced to 55 years and Deal being sentenced to 30. Although for many, it seemed reasonable to investigate whether a thorough job had been done in regards to Sharon and Renee's cases, Michael's appeals and attempts at parole were continuously denied. Michael Self died in prison from cancer in 2000. An article from the Houston Chronicle in 2011 noted that Michael's lawyer had stated his belief that his client was wrongly accused and coerced into a false confession. 2 investigating officers, 1 Galveston police officer and a former prosecutor for Harris County, also shared this belief. Since the untimely demise of both Renee Johnson and Sharon Shaw, there have been multiple other possible suspects beyond Michael Self. In April of 18/90, an unidentified man in Taylor Lake, Texas, walked into his local police departments and claimed to have committed the crime. During his confession, he allegedly admitted that he had tied both of them down with an electrical cord. This was something the police knew about, but had never made public so they could distinguish the real killer from the false confessions. The man reportedly suffered from psychosis, and for some reason, despite the details he had given, he was later dismissed as a suspect by police. Then in 1998, a man named Edward Harold Bell wrote multiple letters to prosecutors in Galveston and Harris County confessing to the slayings of several young girls, some as young as 12 between 1971 and 1977 in the Galveston, Clear Lake, Dickinson, Houston, and Alvin areas. At the time, Bell was serving a 70-year sentence for the brutal killing of ex-Marine Larry Dickens in Pasadena in 1978. Bell had shot Dickens after the man attempted to stop him from publicly masturbating in front of a group of teenage girls. After going on the run for 14 years, Bell was eventually tracked down in Panama in 1993, where he was living with a teenage girl. In August 2015, Bell confessed to murdering 11 young women, calling them the 11 that went to heaven. He shockingly claimed that a secret organization had brainwashed and forced him to carry out the murders. Bell died on April 20, 2019, at the age of 82. His potential involvement in the deaths of Sharon Shaw and Renee Johnson is still under investigation. Given the numerous unexplored avenues and the possibility of coerced confessions, it is unlikely that the full truth of what happened to these two best friends on August 4, 1971, will ever be known. The case remains shrouded in mystery. If you have any theories or thoughts, feel free to share them in the comments below. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.